Hello everyone, welcome to this lecture on evolution of vernacular press in colonial India. This lecture is part of your paper on news and society. In this module, you will learn the historical background of emergence of vernacular news media in India. This will help you to understand the context in which vernacular medium arose in India. This module will explore the colonial background of the growth of vernacular media in India and its relevance in communication studies. It will then go on to discuss the regions of its emergence and its spread in India, in specific its growth and expansion. You will learn this history of news media and in specific vernacular news media and its significance in understanding the present day media, where media has an extensive role to play in society. This module will also bring in perspective the introduction and growth of vernacular media in India. History of vernacular news media in India in colonial period. History of English newspaper. The history of newspaper goes much before printing press was invented. In Indian history, during the period of kings and queens, there were messengers who would go from town to town beating drums to attract the people and loudly read out the king's or queen's message for the people. This was the way information was distributed to the people orally. Some major information or rules that were to be followed by the people were written in scrolls mentioning the religious instruction or policies of the state and read out. Also sometimes they were inscripted on stones and pillars and transferred to different parts of the kingdom for the people to read and follow. During the British period, when East India Company were ruling the India, there were few Britishers who were not too happy with the way the company was usurping the Indian resources, or because they were not made a part of this loot. There were few who were unhappy because they were removed from the services of the company due to certain personal, political or business reasons. Mr. Boltis was one Britisher of this kind who was removed from the services of the East India Company. After he was removed, Mr. Boltis highlighted the evils of East India Company and the British rule in 1768 Mr. Boltis put an advertisement on the doors of the Calcutta Council for the general public. He put on advertisement stating that any person having any interest or knowledge of typing or using of printing press needs to contact him. He would like to bring forth to the public important information regarding the company and the British rule. For this advertisement, Mr. Boltis was made to leave Bengal and shifted to Madras in 1768 and then from there to Europe. Though unsuccessful, this was the first attempt in the history of India to take out newspaper. After 12 years of Mr. Boltis' unsuccessful attempt at bringing out a newspaper, James Augustus Hickey started the newspaper titled Bengal Gazette on 29th January 1780. This was the first English newspaper that was a weekly paper consisting of 4 pages. Apart from news of India, it also contained news from Europe. As media is called the fourth pillar of democracy, in this way we can say that India's attempt for democracy started with this. Hickey published news items against the British, in other words, published news items promoting independence for the country. This newspaper published news of the evil activities of the East India Company and also highlighted the loot taken by specific individuals. As a result, he was rewarded punishment for the same and sent to prison and was also fined. But this did not deter him. He continued writing against the activities of the East India Company, its exploitations of the country from behind the prison walls. He did not stop the publication of the newspaper, and after serving his sentence, he continued writing against the evil activities of the company. As a result, in 1782, the British government stopped his printing press from publishing newspaper, and India's fledgling newspaper was abruptly stopped. The second English newspaper, called India Gazette, started its publication around the same time from Calcutta. This was also a weekly newspaper and was being published in response to Bengal Gazette. This newspaper was pro-British newspaper and was published under their patronage. This was started by Peter Reid and B. Masonic. The third English newspaper that was published under the sponsorship of the British government on March 7, 1784 was titled Calcutta Gazette or Oriental Advertisers. This newspaper was published by Francis Gladwin. He was not only well versed in English but also had knowledge of Urdu. In 1785, a weekly English newspaper titled Bengal General was started. Also in 1791, William Dewan, who was associated with Bengal General for some time, started his own newspaper titled Indian World. This newspaper started highlighting all the evil activities of East India Company. As a result, it was very popular amongst the local Indians. As a result, the company was forced to evict Dewan from India. After William Dewan, it was Dr. Charles Maclean who was evicted from the country, as he was the editor of the newspaper that published news against the company. Five years after Hickey's Gazette, in the year 1785, Madras region got its first English newspaper called Madras Courier. The editor and owner of this newspaper was Richard Johnston. This newspaper was entirely protected by the East India Company. As a result, no other newspaper was being published from Madras at that time. Only after 8 long years was the next weekly newspaper published called Harkaru published. It was published by Hugboyd, but this newspaper did not last for long. The other newspapers published from Madras later were Madras Gazette and India Herald. After Madras, the other place from where newspapers were published were from Bombay. The first English newspaper that was published from here was called Bombay Herald. That was a weekly newspaper. The other newspaper that come out from here was called Bombay Courier. The uniqueness of this newspaper was that in these newspaper advertisements from different regional languages like Gujarati, Marathi and Kannadiga was published. The other newspaper that come out in 1790 was called Bombay Gazette. In this newspaper, news regarding business, social news and political news were published. Also, international news mainly from Europe was also published. The fourth newspaper that was published was called Bombay Observer, that started in 1791. These newspapers had impact on the social, economic and political situation prevalent there. Within a span of 2 decades of the publication of the newspaper, English newspaper started from Calcutta, Madras and Bombay. Gradually, newspaper also started publishing from other cities of India. The genesis of vernacular medium newspaper started from here. History of vernacular newspaper. It was in Bengal that the first English newspaper was started. India's first newspaper was started in Bengal 100 years after the first newspaper was published in Europe. 36 years after the first publication of the English newspaper in India, vernacular newspaper was started in India. First vernacular newspaper in Bengali was published in 1816 called Bengal Gazette by Gangadhar Bhattacharya. This newspaper continued till 1 year and then stopped, and the cost of this newspaper was ₹1 for 1 whole month. Vernacular newspapers were started by Indians, but it was supported by British. In 1800, English press set up a mission in Sri Rampur near Calcutta in Bengal. The main purpose of this mission was to convert the people of the region into Christianity. They focused mainly on the regional language spoken there, that was Bengali. They started publishing newspaper in Bengali, Persian and English. Apart from conversion, their role was also important, as that they helped in the development of printing press and publication in India. In April 1818, they started the first publication titled Dikwar Darshan, monthly newspaper in Bengali language. Also, this newspaper printed news in English that was translated in Bengali in the first page. When this newspaper was not stopped by British government, they started another weekly newspaper called Samachar Darpan. That started on May 23rd, 1818 and continued till 1838. This newspaper had the support of the British government in the strict sense of the term, even though it was a vernacular newspaper. It was owned by the British and supported the views of the British. In this sense, it cannot be called a vernacular newspaper. In the true sense of the term, vernacular newspaper was started by Raja Ram Mohan Roy in his Bengali newspaper titled Sambad Kaumudi and Persian newspaper Miratul Akhbar. We can see the birth of the vernacular medium newspaper. Raja Ram Mohan Roy was a scholar and a social worker who promoted the values of society. He had immense knowledge of Bengali, Arabic, Persian and English. His scholarly knowledge was so well known that newspapers competing with his newspaper would publish his articles with the same pride and fervor. His social work is not only important, but also his effort, fight at promotion of independence of the newspaper is equally important. He raised voice for independence of news from the control of British authority. His efforts can also be seen in the fact that he inculcated interest amongst the readers of the newspapers. Sambad Kaumudi can be called the first Indian vernacular newspaper that focused on the life and language of the region and written and promoted by regional leaders. Raja Ram Mohan Roy is well known for abolishing the practice of sati in India. He raised voice against this practice. As a result of his persistent effort in 1829, this practice of sati was banned in India. A law was passed by the British authority in 1829 to ban this practice. On 31st May 1826, Pandit Ravi Kishore Shukla started the first Hindi newspaper in Devanagari script called Udant Marthand. This newspaper was 8 pages and the monthly cost of this newspaper was Rupee 2. This newspaper continued for 1.5 years and then shut down due to financial problems. On January 6, 1832, Bal Shastri Jambhekar launched first Marathi newspaper called Darpan. This was the time when several vernacular newspapers flourished in India like Odia newspaper, Sambad Vahika, other vernacular mediums like Assamese, Gujarati, Tamil and Malayalam newspaper also expanded during this period. During the period of colonization, press was the medium for transmission of social and political messages. It also played an influential role during the independence movement. During this period, vernacular media played a social and political role. In the colonial period, vernacular newspapers played a dominant role in the independence struggle. Also, they played crucial role in spreading awareness about the social and cultural evils of society like the evil of sati. Vernacular media also promoted educational awareness. In the present day too, vernacular news media have come to occupy a dominant position in globalizing India. I hope you enjoyed the lecture. For more details, please read the module carefully and attempt the questions at the end. Thank you.